Today is the beginning of our series, and it is around Brené Brown's newest book, Atlas of the Heart, mapping meaningful connection and the language of human experience. In it, Brené writes, "The entire premise of this book is that language has the power to define our experiences. In our teaching here in New Thought, language, the words we use really matter. We understand that life-affirming prayer, for example, our form of affirmative prayer, can shift us. It can move us from one state of being to another with our words. And so this book is so germane to our teaching, and it's so relevant to today. The words that we use matter. And we can think of this book really as a tool. It's a spiritual tool, if you will, and it's a map. I love how Brené Brown has created it kind of like a map. 15 years ago, she and her team did some research, and they surveyed over 7,000 people. And the average number of emotions that people could name were 3: happy, sad, or angry. That's it. 3 emotions. She knew that that was a problem, and that this book really has been in the works ever since. We humans, of course, are far more than just happy, sad, or angry. And as Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." If we are consciously or unconsciously limiting language, the language of our emotions, to happy, sad, or angry, we are missing what, say, shame or disappointment, wonder, awe, disgust, embarrassment, despair, contentment, boredom, anxiety, stress, love, overwhelm, surprise, all of those emotions and more, what those can teach us. Those come up in our body temples to teach us something, to guide us somewhere. In her introduction, Brené writes, "When we don't have the language to talk about what we are experiencing, our ability to make sense of what is happening and share it with others is severely limited." The past several years together, we all know here in this community, you all know that we have been living in a time of genuine disconnect, right? Emotionally, physically. We have been distanced. There's been experiences of division within so many of our families, our communities, our country. And in order to create a greater connection with ourselves and with each other, Brené asserts that we must really get proficient at naming where we are emotionally. You've heard me say it a gazillion times, we name it to transcend it. Well, part of what we're going to do here is really laser in and begin to understand what it is to name something that we are emotionally feeling, in an emotional state, so that we can transcend it. There's something called emotional granularity, and that is when we learn to have a nuanced vocabulary and a comprehensive understanding of what happens when we are experiencing a particular emotion. And this can be absolutely life-changing, not only for ourselves, but for all of those around us. And really what this does is this leads us into spiritual maturity. And that's it. That's the point, right? Spiritual growth. So I let you all know a couple of weeks ago that we were going to mix things up a little bit. We're going to take your visioning responses in our community, and we listen. You want us to mix it up? This is what we are doing for you. So, I thought since this whole book, this series, is really about language, that we would better unpack it together, having an actual conversation about it. And so I'm delighted to invite practitioner Shelly Walker up with me, come on up, darling, to have a conversation about this. And have a seat, love, while she's getting settled in. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, know that Shelly and I and all of our vocalists, everyone who has taken their mask off to sing or speak, has tested negative this morning. And that will be our protocol moving forward. So I want you to be aware of that. Today we're going to start this series by exploring a couple of concepts, actually the first 3 chapters in this book, which I think is just yummy and delicious. If you haven't gotten it, I invite you to get it. You don't need it, though, for this. So the very first chapter is, because this is designed as a map, I love how Brene did this. She created it as places you go, emotionally, right? So the first chapter is places we go when things are uncertain or too much, stress and overwhelm. So each of these chapters has several different emotions, and I just picked two for each one for Shelly and I to discuss. And so the first one that, because I don't know about you all, but last 2 years there's been a fair amount of stress and overwhelm. Is that fair to say? Yes? Yeah? Okay. So let's unpack that a little bit. But first I want to be sure to kind of differentiate between the two, because they're two very different things. We tend to kind of clump them into one, they're not. So when we're stressed, there is an environmental demand that is beyond our ability to cope successfully. And Brene tells this really great story about, she used to work in a restaurant. And for any of you who have worked in restaurants, this will resonate. She worked in restaurants for like 6 years, I think she said, something like that. So she talked about this concept when things would get in the restaurant so busy and so stressful. She called it being in the weeds. And in the particular restaurant where she worked, if she was absolutely just stressed out and couldn't meet all the demands of the environment, she or any of the wait staff would come into the kitchen and they would say, "I'm in the weeds." And the manager would immediately pull the tickets and give everyone assignments. Table 3, you go re-tea. Table 5, they need their check. Table 6, bring those plates out. The food's getting cold. Whatever it was, so that it could be de-escalated. So the stressful situation could be de-escalated, right? So that is in the weeds. Being overwhelmed, though, is different. Often stress leads to overwhelm. That's kind of the bridge. So if you don't catch it early enough, you can move into overwhelm. She quotes John Kabat-Zinn, who writes, "Overwhelm is the all too common feeling that our lives are somehow unfolding faster than the human nervous system and psyche are able to manage well." So in the restaurant, I had never heard this. Had you heard this before? No, I had never heard this either. Maybe you all have heard this, but this concept of "I'm blown." Sarah, have you heard "I'm blown" before? I hadn't either. Okay. So "I'm blown," she explains in her book, that and it only happened to her twice in 6 years, but that when a person on staff, a wait staff walked into the kitchen and said, "I'm blown," the manager would say, "Go outside." That means I'm in complete overwhelm. I cannot even delegate. I can't even see straight. I can't handle it. And what that is, from a spiritual perspective, is when we are overwhelmed, it's the call to go into non-doing, right? Not so easy for many of us, this idea of non-doing.
I don't know why she's looking at me.
No one here. But that's the idea. And I was actually brought to tears when I read that, because I thought, wow, that's so supportive and beautiful, that they would set the timer for 10 minutes, metaphorically, but they would step outside and just had to get out of their brain, had to get out of everything, had to engage in non-doing in order to be able to deal with the overwhelm and come back in. So, so many of us have experienced this overwhelm.
Oh, yeah.
And I was curious about this, and I looked up some statistics, and I found that, because so many of us went into overwhelm during the pandemic. Are you ready for this? Okay, in 2020, alcohol sales increased 262%. Wow. From 2019. 262%. Wow. One study showed that women increased heavy drinking by 41%. And in 2020, Netflix, their profit jumped 76%. They added 36 million subscribers.
Wow.
So the question then becomes, how do we avoid numbing and disconnecting when we are stressed, when we are overwhelmed? So Shelly, I would love for you to speak a little bit about, what is it that I'm going to pull this down a little so you can, there we go. What is it that you have noticed? What is it that you do? What resonated with you in all of this?
It's interesting. I've been in this teaching now for 20 years, and to look back over the course of becoming more spiritually mature. It's a process. It's not something that has an end point. I'm still working on that. However, to notice just how recently I have gotten to a place to be able to notice the difference of when I'm stressed and I need to stop, take a breath, connect, remind myself there's more than enough money, there's more than enough time, there's more than enough love.
Yes.
It's all right there. Everything's going to be okay. So that stress of being able to stop and connect and breathe. But then when that overwhelm hits, woo-woo moment, being a Pisces, I go right into my emotions, and sometimes they pour out on those around me occasionally. And so I think that it takes a certain amount of spiritual maturity, of emotional maturity, to recognize overwhelm for what it is. Wait a minute, I need to go outside and cry for 10 minutes and hit that reset.
Yes. You know what? I have made an agreement with myself, and because of overwhelm. And there have been times where I have been, this job, requires a lot. And there have been times where I have absolutely been in overwhelm and have just pushed myself. Yeah. And that's unhealthy. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I made an agreement with myself that I would let my family and this beautiful, amazing staff that I get to work with, when I'm in the weeds, to be able to say, I'm in the weeds, I need to delegate. Or, I'm blown. I need to go outside. I need to not, I'll give you an example. Just a few minutes ago, when we were starting the service, I had a little note passed to me that the software, I guess, Mercury's in retrograde, and the software was is funky on Facebook, and some of you may have had a hard time finding us because you watch us on Facebook as opposed to YouTube. And just as that was starting, I had to realize I can't fix the software from where I am. I am so grateful that I know that that's happening, and I was able to just say, I have to step outside. I know that you all are going to find us. I know that you all are going to care for everything. I know that all the parts are going to happen in a smooth way. And then you all went into your spiritual practice, and I was transformed completely out of the place of like, what do you mean our first service online only for this series? We're having issues with Facebook. Okay, God, right into that beautiful spiritual practice and reminder. It is for all of us.
Yeah. And it's, for me, it's taking that moment and whatever it takes to reconnect. Yes. It's all about connection.
Yes. So I thank you for that beautiful spiritual practice, and all of you musicians. You took me right out of that and right back in, out and in. The second chapter of this book is Places We Go When We Compare. Places we go when we compare. Schadenfreude and Freudenfreude. Schadenfreude and Freudenfreude. So Schadenfreude is a German word that means pleasure or joy that is derived from someone else's pain or suffering. Ouch. Recently, on a Ted Lasso episode, when one of the characters was rejoicing at another character's misfortune, Ted Lasso, if you haven't watched that show yet, just start watching that show. It's so great. Ted Lasso declared that The Office was a Schadenfreude-free zone, which I love. So Schadenfreude is not to be confused. This is really important. It's not to be confused with when we experience relief when someone is held accountable for wrongdoing. It's important. That is a different thing. We're not celebrating the perpetrator's suffering. Rather, we're grateful for the accountability that the person who caused pain will receive. That's not Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is actually, for any of you who may have experienced this in your life, oftentimes it can be connected to familial patterns associated with punishment and shame Brene Brown actually talks about Schadenfreude coming up a lot during the pandemic, when vaccinated people struggled with feeling outside of their values when they found themselves celebrating, in a sense, when unvaccinated people got COVID. And Brene Brown herself talks about it in the book that she wrestled with this, and she said that it would pop into her head, because they were threatening people that she loved. But in the end, she couldn't make it work with her values. And, there's a lot of, we don't like to talk about Schadenfreude because there is a lot of shame or guilt that can come up, but, this is, of course, the place where we bring all of this. It's that concept, I don't know if you were raised with this, but it's like an eye for an eye, So what do we do? When we see Schadenfreude in the media, in the people around us, within ourselves? So, Shel, where does this land for you? What do you think?
I thought it was really interesting that she had this in the same chapter as she did envy and jealousy.
Yes.
Because it kind of made a little connection for me of how often do we fall into this pattern when what it is we have been envious of this person and we're happy to see them brought down. Ouch. Oh, I don't even like how that feels in my body to say the words. It's so uncomfortable. Yes. There's this beautiful teaching in the Kabbalah about part of spiritual, the spiritual journey is coming to truly want for others what you want for yourself.
Yes.
I don't want them to get ill. I don't want to get ill. I don't want my family to get ill. I don't want them to be ill either. Yeah. And so for me, when I see this joy in others' suffering, you see it in the media so much. I feel like it's a part of how women often relate to each other in the patriarchy. It's really an unfortunate pattern that I've seen. And I again, it's about noticing and connecting what is underneath that. Yeah. What is underneath that for you?
Yes. Well, one of the things that Brene Brown brings in that I think is a really great thing, if you've noticed this in your life or within yourself, one of the key questions that, again, it's about stopping. It's about making the unconscious conscious. And the question becomes, is this who I want to be?
Yes.
Is this who I want to be? Do I want to be someone who celebrates the pain and suffering of someone else? I don't think anybody wants to be that person. And so then we get to navigate that and we get to be with those feelings. And again, it's just bringing everything to the light as we can. Speaking of light, so the opposite of Schadenfreude is Freudenfreude.
That's right.
Freudenfreude. I just want to kind of do a little dance when I say that. Freudenfreude. And that is the actual enjoyment of another person's success. And this really is the antidote. This is the spiritual answer. This is the choice that we can make. If that feeling comes up of Schadenfreude, we can notice that. Is this who I really want to be? Actually, no. Lay that down and turn towards Freudenfreude. Freudenfreude, is just the celebration of someone else. When I was a kid, really young, and I remember when the lottery first kind of started. I grew up in Sacramento, California, and the lottery had just started, and everybody was buying scratchers all the time. It was very exciting. And my mom used to go to the local grocery store. She called it her club, because that's where she would see a lot of her friends, and they would like hang out, with the lettuce and just get kind of a pretext. They would catch up. And she went, one day she was in the line to pay for her groceries, and a neighbor, a family friend whose kids went to our school, a dad was in front of her, just right in front of her, and they had kind of walked up at the same time, and he was there and she was behind him, and they both bought scratchers, and we're sort of joking about that. Well, he won the lottery.
Oh my gosh.
He won the lottery. My mom could have, she could have resented it. She could have thought, oh, if I'd only gotten into that line faster, if he'd only let me in. Not at all. In fact, she celebrated. I watched her celebrate that their whole life transformed, that things became, financially so much easier for their family. A beautiful example of Freudenfreude. So, that's another familial pattern, that if you were not raised with that, you can begin that. You can actually start that. You can teach your children that and the people around you that. What do you think about that?
I think it's brilliant. I think that it's something that you do particularly well. I watch you celebrate, your staff's successes, and I think it's something that isn't necessarily taught in all of our families of origin. And so I love that you had that natural example in front of you.
Thank you. Well, it was. Thanks, Mom. It was all from my mom. In the book, Brene has this really cool story about Abby Wambach.
Oh, yeah.
And in Abby's book, she's a superstar soccer champion, Olympian, stratospheric soccer player, legend. Yes. And she wrote a book called Wolfpack. And in her book, she has something called Point and Run. Point and Run, she had this thing that she would do when she would make a goal. Instead of taking that glory for herself, she would turn to the woman who passed, who assisted, who gave her the ball, or the coach who called the play, and she would point to them, and she would start to run to them to celebrate them. I have God bumps. Isn't that the coolest thing?
I love that so much.
And so the spiritual tool here is, I think, to really notice who in your life you can point to. Who in your life you can really celebrate, and do more of that.
Yeah,
do more of that. So the third chapter that we're gonna just touch on this morning is called "Places We Go When Things Don't Go as Planned: Disappointment and Regret." Mm-hmm. Anyone?
No.
Anyone? All right, so disappointment is unmet expectations. That's just straight up, that's what that is. Another way of saying it is psychologist Albert Ellis said expectation is premeditated disappointment.
Ouch.
Oh. Expectation is premeditated disappointment. Oh. This is a biggie. And in Brene's research, she found that it's probably the most frequently experienced emotion that is negative and that tends to be experienced with the highest level of intensity is disappointment. Kind of like what you talked about earlier, Shel, is we're always talking about this. What is underneath? What is underneath? What is underneath this? To really peel back those layers and get eradicate the false beliefs so we can get underneath what's really happening and make as much conscious as we can. And I'm going to just read to you 3 examples that she gives of this, and then I'm just kind of adding in what's underneath that. So you might say to yourself, it's going to be a great holiday. I've got everything planned down to the minute. Any micromanagers here? I've got everything planned down to the minute. So you can ask yourself...
My daughter's not laughing at me right now, Reverend Shannon, over there. No.
So for anyone for whom this resonates, you can ask yourself, what is this really about? What do I need from this gathering, and why? Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with the planning. It's what do I need? What are my needs here? Second example she gives, my sister-in-law is going to love her gift and be so impressed with dinner. Anybody overplan in that regard? You could ask yourself, what is this really about? Why do I want to impress my sister-in-law? What is it within me that is wanting here? And the third example she gives is, I can't wait to share my presentation with the team tomorrow. They're going to be blown away and really appreciate how hard I've worked. So, underneath that might be, what part of me is not feeling validated or good enough right now? There's always something deeper going on whenever there is an expectation. And so Shel, I would love to kind of toss it to you a little bit and ask you, what is it that you experience with disappointment?
It came up for me this morning, Reverend Shannon. I'm a planner. I plan things. It's fun for me to plan things.
Yeah.
I'm good at planning things.
Yes, you are.
However, what I have come to realize in my life is that much of my desire to plan things comes from this childhood belief that predictability is safe. It became a trauma response.
Sure.
It became a trauma response. If I have it all planned out, if I know what it's going to look like, I can picture myself in it. I can make sure that everything is safe for me, for my family, for you, for everyone.
Yes.
And so I feel like I cannot say this enough. But when we are experiencing disappointment, so often it's because we have set ourselves up for it. Yes. And when I am not projecting my expectations onto everything and everyone around me, I'm able to be in the divine flow that you so beautifully teach us about.
So it sounds like the spiritual tool for you is recognizing that it's coming out of a trauma response. So you're identifying what that is. And then again, you're making it conscious. You're making a different choice, right? You're choosing to be in the flow of the divine, which really is about trust. Right. It's about trust.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to plan.
Yes.
But
yes.
It's noticing when it's coming from a healthy place
Yes.
and when it's coming from an unhealthy place.
Yes, absolutely. And in our class right now that I'm teaching around the 4 agreements, it's about not being attached to outcome. And this is the ancient Buddhist tradition about trusting and being in the flow is really allowing ourselves to trust the divine, to trust that God's spirit source has this, to be that's the only way we can be unattached to outcome, right? Which leads us to the other piece that Brene talks about so beautifully in this chapter, and that is regret.
Yeah.
Regret. So she teaches that both disappointment and regret arise when an outcome was not what we wanted, counted on, or thought would happen. With regret, though, we believe the outcome was caused by our decisions or actions. So in the film We're the Millers, there's a tough-looking kid with the phrase "no regrets" in capital letters on his chest. It's tattooed. However, the word regrets is spelled in capital letters R-A-G-R-E-T-S. No regrets. And in the movie, the character played by Jason Sudeikis says to the guy, "Really? You have no regrets? Not even one letter?" Not even one letter, no regrets. For the longest time when I would hear people say, no regrets, I had a sense of sadness. And it took me a while to kind of figure out what that was. And what I realized for myself is that always felt sad to me, because it felt like, buddy, you're missing the lesson. You're missing the opportunity for growth. If you say you have no regrets, there's no spiritual growth there. Now, this is not to be confused with going down the rabbit hole of guilt and self-blame. That is a whole other thing, and that's not what this is about, It just simply means that when we have a regret, when we know better, we do better, right? And if we can move into that energy field, life gets better. Yeah. Brene Brown writes, "The idea of no regrets doesn't mean living with courage. It means living without reflection." To live without regret, she writes, means we have nothing to learn, no amends to make, and no opportunity to be braver with our lives. And the thing is that we always have an opportunity to stop regret before it happens by implementing spiritual tools. Yeah. And I would love, Shelly, you told me a story about your cousin and her friend, and I would love for you to share that story, because it's so powerful.
I was catching up with my dear cousin who I hadn't spoken to. I had those really good conversations for a couple of years. And I said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, my friend Susan died today." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And she said, "Can I tell you something I love about Susan?" And I said, "Tell me 10 things you love about Susan, And she said, Susan was the kind of person who truly loved everyone. She loved everyone. And at one point in her life, she had a falling out with her sister. And Susan was not going to let this falling out that had happened stop her from loving her sister. So here's what she did. Every Saturday, she picked up the phone and she called her sister and she just left a chatty message. Hey, it's me. This is what's going on with the kids. I'm looking forward to our vacation next week, and I love you. And she did this every single Saturday for 7 years. For 7 years, her sister never picked up. And Susan ended up having a long experience with a cancer. And over the course of this 7 years, she made 300 phone calls to her sister. I love you. I'll talk to you next week. For 7 years. And then one day, her sister had the courage to pick up the phone. Her sister had the courage to pick up the phone. And for me, the lessons are so deep in this story because it's not only about Susan's ability to love so unconditionally with no expectations and no disappointment. How glorious is that? But for her sister to have the courage to pick up the phone. After all of that love had been poured her way, and that wall must have been so thick and so strong for her sister to have the courage to pick up the phone and to not have that regret, Reverend Shannon. What you just said, and I had never thought of it that way, that we always have the chance to take another path so we don't have those regrets.
Yeah.
It takes courage.
Yeah, it's courage.
It's courage.
That story, hearing it the second time, landed in an even deeper place in me. It's even more, it's so, because I think especially now, so many of us are moving through experiences of having our loved ones, move to the other side of life.
Yeah.
And we have these opportunities to be courageous, to speak our emotions so that we can connect so deeply. I think that there is such a deep opportunity for all of us to lean into our kindness, to lean into the vulnerability that always leads us to courage so that we prevent regret. And, I just thank you so much for sharing that story. I just love it. I just really love it. I'm going to invite you all in this next week to look at the places in your life where you can pick up the phone. Whatever that is for you. Where can you pick up the phone? Where can you walk our faith even more? Our faith of oneness and inclusivity. Speaking of walking, tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day, and in his honor here in Lake Oswego, there is a silent walk today at 2 o'clock. People will be masked and distanced and meeting in the main plaza and then having a silent walk in his honor. And, if that resonates for you, I invite you to come. And if it doesn't, wherever you are, you can check local listings for what's happening for you. And even just taking time in the silence for yourself, walking your faith for yourself internally is very powerful right now. If that is all you can do, if that is the best, that's great. Because the fact of the matter is we are historically and politically in a time of great potential or great regret.
Yeah.
We have very, very important voting rights bill, legislation that's coming up. There's a lot that we are going to be walking together as people of faith in this community. And I am just going to invite all of us to lean into that place of picking up the phone, of walking what it is ours to do, of doing what is ours to do, of choosing kindness, and really beginning to identify those emotions that come up and name them so that we can be more specific within ourselves and our relationships to bring more clarity and more connection and more peace.